The gunfire came without warning, tearing through the night like thunder, shattering the fragile peace of a family who believed distance could keep them safe. 19-year-old Evelyn Carter watched her world burn in minutes, her father's blood soaking into the dirt, her home collapsing into flame, and rough hands dragging her into darkness. Taken by Comanche warriors, she became a captive on the unforgiving frontier of 1867, where survival meant forgetting everything she once knew. But what happens when the enemy becomes something else entirely? Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The smell hit Evelyn first. Smoke. Thick, acrid, choking, rolling through her bedroom window in waves that turned the moonlight gray. She jerked awake, her heart already hammering before her mind could catch up, before she could piece together what was wrong. The air tasted like burning wood, and something else, something sharper that made her stomach clench. Then came the screaming. Her mother's voice, high and ragged, cut through the roar of flames. Evelyn threw off her quilt and stumbled to the window, her bare feet cold against the rough floorboards. Through the warped glass, she saw hell itself painted across the ranch. Fire consumed the barn. Orange tongues licked up the sides, devouring the structure her father had spent 3 summers building. The horses were shrieking, those terrible, almost human sounds of animals burning alive. Shadows moved between the flames, figures on horseback, their silhouettes sharp against the inferno. Raiders. Evelyn's breath stopped in her throat. She'd heard the stories, whispered in town over dry goods counters, and in the anxious silences of Sunday gatherings. Comanche war parties moving through the territory, striking remote homesteads, taking what they wanted: livestock, supplies, captives. Her father had always said they were far enough out, isolated enough that trouble wouldn't find them. He'd been wrong. Glass shattered downstairs. Her mother screamed again, and this time the sound ended abruptly, replaced by her father's roar of rage. Evelyn heard the unmistakable crack of his rifle, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Then silence. Not true silence. The fire still crackled, the remaining horses still screamed, but the absence of her father's voice created a void that sucked the air from Evelyn's lungs. She had to move, had to hide, had to... Her bedroom door exploded inward. The warrior filled the doorway, backlit by the flames outside, his features obscured by shadow and smoke. Evelyn scrambled backward, her shoulders hitting the wall beside her bed. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came. Terror had locked her throat shut. He moved fast, faster than she thought possible. One moment he was in the doorway, the next his hand was clamped over her mouth, his other arm wrapping around her waist and hauling her off her feet. She thrashed, her fists connecting with solid muscle that didn't even flinch. Her nails raked across his forearm, drawing blood, but his grip only tightened. He carried her through the burning house like she weighed nothing, through her bedroom door, down the hallway where family portraits hung crooked on smoke-stained walls, past her parents' room. Don't look, don't look, don't look. And down the stairs where embers drifted through the air like malevolent fireflies. The main room was an inferno. Flames crawled up the curtains her mother had sewn, devoured the table where they'd eaten breakfast that morning, consumed the rocking chair where her father had sat every evening, reading by lamplight. And there, sprawled near the overturned table, was her father. Thomas Carter lay on his back, his rifle a few feet from his outstretched hand. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, but they saw nothing. Blood pooled beneath him, black in the firelight, spreading across the floorboards he'd laid himself when Evelyn was just a girl. Something inside her shattered. She stopped fighting, went completely still in the warrior's arms, not from surrender, but from a kind of shock so profound that her body simply ceased to function. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing, couldn't reconcile the still figure on the floor with the man who'd taught her to ride, who'd promised her they'd be safe, who'd been alive 30 seconds ago. The warrior carried her outside. Cold night air slapped her face, but she barely felt it. Around her, chaos reigned. More warriors moved through the property with practiced efficiency, leading horses from the corral, gathering supplies, setting fire to what remained standing. She counted 5 of them. No, 6, 7. Her vision kept blurring, making it hard to track their movements. One of them, older, with gray streaking his long hair, barked something in a language that sounded like running water over stones. The warrior holding Evelyn responded in the same tongue, his voice vibrating through his chest against her back. She was dropped onto a horse. The impact jarred her from her stupor enough to grab the animal's mane, her fingers tangling in the coarse hair. The warrior swung up behind her, one arm locking around her waist again, and then they were moving. The horse lunged forward, and Evelyn watched her world disappear. The ranch, her home for all 19 years of her life, receded into the darkness, marked only by the column of smoke rising toward the stars. She twisted in the saddle, craning her neck, needing to see, but the warrior's arm tightened, forcing her forward. "No," she finally managed, the words scraping out of her raw throat. "No, please." The warrior said something, his tone firm but not cruel. She didn't understand a word. She tried to turn again, fighting against his hold, but it was like fighting a mountain. He adjusted his grip, pulling her more securely against him, and kept the horse moving at a steady lope. They rode for what felt like hours. Maybe it was hours. Evelyn lost track of time, lost in the rhythmic motion of the horse and the expanding numbness that spread through her chest. Other riders flanked them. She could hear their horses, glimpse their shadows in her peripheral vision, but she couldn't bring herself to look at them directly. Her father was dead. The knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone, heavy and cold and undeniable. Her mother, she didn't know, hadn't seen, didn't want to think about it, couldn't afford to think about it, because if she did, she'd start screaming and never stop. The landscape changed around them. Rolling grassland gave way to rockier terrain, dotted with scrub brush and twisted juniper trees. The moon hung low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Beautiful in a terrible way. The kind of beauty that didn't care whether you lived or died beneath it. As dawn began to gray the eastern sky, the warriors slowed their pace. Ahead, Evelyn could make out more figures. A larger group, maybe 20 or 30 people, with horses and travois loaded with supplies. A camp of some kind, though they didn't stop moving, just fell into formation with the larger party. Women glanced at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Children stared openly, some pointing, until their mothers pulled them away. Evelyn kept her eyes forward, her spine rigid, determined not to show how terrified she was. The warrior who'd taken her, her captor, she had to call him something, spoke to an older woman who rode close. The woman looked Evelyn up and down with sharp, assessing eyes, then said something that made several nearby riders laugh. Not cruel laughter exactly, but not kind either. The laughter of people who'd seen this before, who knew how this story went. Evelyn's nightgown was torn at the shoulder, streaked with ash and blood. Some of it from the scratch she'd given her captor, some from sources she didn't want to identify. Her feet were bare, already blistered from the stirrups. Her hair hung in tangled waves around her face, and she could taste smoke on every breath. She looked like exactly what she was, a captive. Spoils of war. The sun climbed higher. The party moved steadily southwest, following paths that seemed random to Evelyn but were clearly familiar to her captors. They crossed a shallow river, the cold water shocking against her bare legs, and climbed into higher country where the air smelled of sage and dust. No one offered her food. No one spoke to her. She existed in a bubble of isolation, surrounded by people who acted as if she were cargo rather than human. By midday, exhaustion was making her sway in the saddle. She'd been awake for over 24 hours, riding for most of them, and her body was starting to shut down whether she wanted it to or not. Her eyes kept drifting closed, her head drooping forward. The warrior adjusted his hold, pulling her back against his chest. It should have made her panic, being pressed against her father's murderer, but she was too tired to care. Her body recognized support and took it, even as her mind recoiled from the acceptance. She woke to shouting, jerked back to consciousness. Evelyn found the party had stopped. Warriors were dismounting, gathering in a cluster around something she couldn't see. Voices rose in what sounded like argument, sharp words flying back and forth in that flowing language she couldn't parse. Her captor dismounted, then reached up and lifted her down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, but his hand on her arm kept her upright. He guided her toward a tree, a gnarled oak that stood alone in the grassland, and made her sit with her back against the trunk. Then he did something unexpected. He crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. In the full light of day, she could finally see him clearly. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe mid-20s, with strong features and dark eyes that held an intensity that made her want to look away. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow. His hair hung past his shoulders, sections wrapped with leather cord and feathers. He reached for her foot. Evelyn jerked back, drawing her legs up, but he made a low sound, not quite soothing, but not aggressive either, and waited. After a moment, when she didn't move again, he took her ankle gently and examined her blistered feet. His expression tightened. He said something, his tone almost apologetic. Then he pulled a leather bag from his belt, extracted a small container of what looked like grease, and began applying it to her blisters with surprising care. Evelyn stared at him, completely thrown. This man had dragged her from her burning home, had been part of the raid that killed her father, and now he was tending her wounds like she mattered, like she was worth the effort. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. When he finished, he pulled out a strip of dried meat and offered it to her. She wanted to refuse, wanted to spit in his face, wanted to scream and fight and make him understand what he'd taken from her. But her stomach was a hollow ache, and survival instinct overrode pride. She took the meat, ate it, hated herself for it. The warrior nodded, something that might have been approval in his eyes, then stood and returned to the group still arguing near the horses. Evelyn drew her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, making herself as small as possible. Around her, the camp settled into temporary stillness. Women began preparing food, children played at the edge of the group, warriors tended to horses and weapons. Normal life, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if her world hadn't ended 12 hours ago. She watched them, these people who'd destroyed everything she knew, tried to see them as the monsters from the stories. But they weren't monsters. They were people, laughing, arguing, caring for their children, living. That somehow made it worse, made the grief more complicated, tangled with confusion and a creeping horror at her own situation. What would they do with her? The stories had answers to that question, none of them good. Slavery, abuse, death. She'd heard it all, whispered in voices that made her shudder even in the safety of her own home. But her captor had treated her blisters. That small kindness sat uneasily against everything she thought she knew, creating a dissonance that made her head ache. The older woman from before approached, carrying a bundle. She dropped it at Evelyn's feet without ceremony, said something in that incomprehensible language, then walked away. Evelyn unfolded the bundle to find clothing, a simple leather dress, soft and worn but clean, and a pair of moccasins. The message was clear: put these on. She glanced around. No one was paying attention to her, everyone absorbed in their own tasks. With shaking hands, she stripped off her ruined nightgown and pulled on the dress. It hung loose on her frame, clearly made for someone larger, but it covered her. The moccasins fit reasonably well, cushioning her damaged feet. Dressed in their clothing, she looked like one of them. The thought made her stomach turn. But the dress was warm, and the alternative was freezing in her torn nightgown. Survival, she was learning, came with compromises that shame couldn't prevent. The party moved out again as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. This time, her captor kept the horse at a walk, and Evelyn noticed he stayed toward the back of the group rather than in the middle, giving her space, perhaps, or just less interested now that the raid was over and she was secured. As evening painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, colors too beautiful for a day this terrible, they crested a rise and Evelyn saw their destination. A village spread across the valley below. Not the permanent structures she'd expected, but dozens of teepees arranged in loose clusters, with cook fires sending smoke into the darkening sky. Dogs barked as the returning party descended, and people emerged from the dwellings, calling out greetings, running to meet the warriors. A successful raid, Evelyn realized with a sick twist in her gut. They were celebrating. Children swarmed the horses, talking excitedly, touching the goods loaded on the travois. Warriors dismounted, embracing family members, distributing items from the raid. Evelyn saw blankets from her home, the blue quilt her grandmother had made, handed to a young woman who accepted it with delight. Her throat closed. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only watch as pieces of her life were parceled out like prizes. The warrior, she needed to call him something, needed a name to attach to him in her mind, lifted her down again. This time, he kept a hand on her arm, guiding her through the growing crowd. People stared. Some reached out as if to touch her hair, but he said something sharp that made them pull back. He led her to a teepee set slightly apart from the others, larger than most. A woman emerged as they approached, tall, with silver threading through her dark hair, and the kind of presence that commanded respect. She looked at Evelyn, then at the warrior, and spoke in a voice that carried authority. The warrior responded, his tone respectful but firm. An argument followed, quick and heated, but the older woman eventually made a dismissive gesture and disappeared back into the teepee. The warrior, Evelyn decided to call him the Scar, after the mark through his eyebrow, guided her to sit near a fire pit outside the dwelling. Then he brought her water in a leather container, more dried meat, and a blanket. Each small kindness felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Why was he doing this? What did he want from her? As full darkness fell, and the village settled into evening routines, the Scar finally spoke to her directly. She couldn't understand the words, but his tone seemed explanatory, almost gentle. He pointed to the teepee, then to her, then made a sleeping gesture. She would stay here, apparently, with him. Fresh fear spiked through her, but he was already moving away, going to join a group of warriors gathering near the largest fire, leaving her alone, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of smoke and sage, in the heart of an enemy camp. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter and stared into the small fire. Sparks drifted upward, disappearing into the vast darkness above. Somewhere beyond that darkness, in the opposite direction from this village, lay the burned remains of her home, her father's body, growing cold. Her mother, she still didn't know, couldn't bear to know. She was 19 years old, and her life had ended. Or perhaps more terrifying, it had just begun. Around her, the village hummed with life. Laughter from nearby fires, children being called to bed, the low murmur of evening conversations. Normal sounds. Peaceful sounds. Sounds that didn't belong in a nightmare but were somehow real anyway. The Scar returned sometime later, his shadow falling across her fire. He settled on the opposite side, cross-legged, and began working on some piece of equipment. A bridle, she thought, though the light was too dim to be certain. He didn't speak, didn't even look at her much, just worked with steady, practiced movements. After a while, the older woman from before emerged from the teepee. She looked at Evelyn with an expression that might have been pity or contempt, impossible to tell, then said something to the Scar. He nodded, set aside his work, and stood. He gestured for Evelyn to follow. Inside the teepee, a fire burned in the center, its smoke drawn up through the opening at the top. Bedding was arranged around the perimeter, furs and woven blankets that looked warm and surprisingly comfortable. The older woman had already claimed one section, and she pointedly turned her back as they entered. The Scar indicated a space across the fire from the woman, then began preparing his own bed near the entrance. Between them, between Evelyn and the door, creating a barrier. Whether to keep her in or protect her from others, she couldn't tell. Maybe both. She lay down on the furs, pulling a blanket over herself, and stared at the dancing shadows on the teepee's interior. Her body was exhausted beyond measure, but her mind raced, refusing to settle, replaying the night's horrors on an endless loop. Her father's open eyes, the flames consuming her home, the laughter as her belongings were distributed like spoils, but also the Scar treating her blisters, the water he'd brought her, the blanket, the space he'd given her, kindness from her captor, cruelty from circumstance. Nothing was simple, nothing was clear, and she didn't know which way was up anymore. Across the fire, the Scar's breathing had already evened out into sleep. The older woman snored softly. Outside, the village had grown quiet, only the occasional dog barking or baby crying breaking the stillness. Evelyn closed her eyes and waited for sleep that didn't come. Tomorrow would bring new horrors, new humiliations, new lessons in survival. But tonight, in this stolen moment between one life and whatever came next, she allowed herself one small, silent rebellion. She remembered her father's laugh, deep and warm, her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair, the smell of bread baking in their kitchen, the feel of sun-warmed wood beneath her bare feet on the porch, the vast, empty silence of the prairie at dawn, broken only by birdsong. She remembered who she'd been 24 hours ago, Evelyn Carter, daughter, dreamer, a girl who'd believed in safety and tomorrow. That girl was dead, burned with the ranch, buried with her father, but maybe, In the remembering, she could carry something of her forward, some piece of herself that they couldn't take, couldn't destroy, no matter what came next. It was a small defiance, a tiny act of resistance, but it was hers, and for now, in this terrible new world, it would have to be enough. The fire burned low, embers glowing like distant stars, and finally, exhaustion claimed her. She slipped into uneasy sleep, her last conscious thought a question she couldn't answer. What happens to a person when everything they knew becomes memory, and the only path forward leads through the hands of those who destroyed it all? She would learn. Whether she wanted to or not, she would learn. The frontier had no mercy for those who couldn't adapt. And Evelyn Carter, captive and survivor, was about to discover just how much a person could endure and become when the choice was simple. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Evelyn woke to unfamiliar sounds, voices speaking that liquid language, the crackle of fire being rebuilt, children laughing somewhere close. For one merciful moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then reality crashed back and the grief hit so hard she couldn't breathe. She lay perfectly still, eyes closed, hoping it was a nightmare. That she'd wake again in her own bed, hear her father stoking the stove downstairs, smell her mother's coffee brewing. But the furs beneath her were too soft, the air too thick with wood smoke, and when she finally opened her eyes, she saw the curved walls of the teepee instead of her bedroom ceiling. The older woman was already gone. The Scar sat by the fire, working on the same bridle from the night before, his movements precise and unhurried. He glanced up when she stirred, studied her for a moment, then returned to his task without speaking. Evelyn sat up slowly, every muscle in her body screaming protest. The ride had left her stiff and aching in places she didn't know could hurt. Her feet throbbed despite the salve. Her throat was raw from smoke and screaming, and her eyes felt swollen from crying she didn't remember doing. The Scar set aside his work and stood. He disappeared outside, returning moments later with a wooden bowl of something that steamed in the cool morning air. He set it beside her, along with a leather water container, then resumed his seat by the fire. Evelyn looked at the bowl. Some kind of porridge or mush, studded with what looked like berries. Her stomach growled despite everything, and shame flooded through her. How could she be hungry? How could her body demand food when her father was dead, when everything was gone? But hunger didn't care about grief. She ate. Slowly at first, then faster as her body recognized sustenance. The porridge was bland but filling, the berries tart and slightly sweet. She drained the water container, surprised by her own thirst. The Scar watched her eat with an expression she couldn't read. When she finished, he stood again and gestured for her to follow. Outside, the village was fully awake. Women tended fires, prepared food, worked on hides stretched across wooden frames. Men checked weapons, worked with horses, gathered in small groups talking. Children ran between the teepees, playing games that looked universal despite the unfamiliar setting. Normal life, like yesterday had been just another day. Evelyn wanted to scream at them all. The Scar led her to the edge of the village, where a stream cut through the grassland. Other women were already there, washing clothes, filling water containers, talking among themselves. They fell silent when Evelyn and the Scar approached, their eyes tracking her movements with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. He said something to her or to them, she couldn't tell, then walked a short distance away and turned his back, giving her privacy, she realized, to wash. The women resumed their tasks, but Evelyn felt their attention like heat against her skin. She knelt by the stream, the water so cold it made her gasp when she plunged her hands in. She scrubbed at her face, her arms, trying to wash away the ash and blood and feel of yesterday. It didn't work. She could still feel it all, embedded in her skin, permanent as scars. One of the women, younger, maybe Evelyn's age, moved closer. She had kind eyes, and when she spoke, her tone was gentle, despite the incomprehensible words. She mimed washing hair, then pointed to Evelyn. Evelyn nodded, not sure what else to do. The young woman smiled and gestured for Evelyn to lean over the stream. Then, with surprising gentleness, she began washing Evelyn's hair, working her fingers through the tangled mess, rinsing away ash and debris. It was such a simple kindness, so unexpected, that tears sprang to Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing the words meant nothing here. But the young woman seemed to understand anyway. She squeezed Evelyn's shoulder briefly, then returned to her own tasks. When Evelyn's hair was as clean as stream water could make it, the scar returned. He led her back through the village, and she noticed people staring less now. Or maybe she was just getting used to it. He brought her to the large teepee from yesterday, the one where the older woman with authority lived. That woman sat outside now, working on what looked like beadwork, her hands moving with practiced skill. She looked up as they approached, and her expression hardened. She said something sharp to the scar. He responded calmly, but the woman's voice rose, becoming more insistent. An argument, clearly, and Evelyn was the subject even if she couldn't understand the words. The woman gestured at Evelyn dismissively, said something that made other nearby women laugh, not kindly, and returned to her beadwork with an air of finality. The scar's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he turned to Evelyn and, with gestures and simple repetition, began teaching her. Cairo, he said, pointing to himself. Cairo. She stared at him, uncomprehending at first. Then understanding dawned. His name. He was telling her his name. Cairo, she repeated, the syllables feeling strange in her mouth. He nodded, then pointed to her expectantly. Evelyn, she said quietly. My name is Evelyn. Evelyn, he tried, struggling with the unfamiliar sounds. Evelyn. Close enough. She nodded. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes. Then he began pointing to objects, speaking their names in his language, clearly expecting her to repeat them. Fire, water, sky, ground, horse, dog. Evelyn repeated each word mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Why was he doing this? Why bother teaching her anything? Unless he expected her to be here long enough to need the language. The thought made her stomach clench, but she repeated the words anyway. Because what else could she do? The lesson continued for what felt like hours. Cairo was patient but insistent, making her repeat words until her pronunciation satisfied him. Other people passed by, watching with varying degrees of interest, but he ignored them, focused entirely on teaching her. Finally, he seemed satisfied. He stood, gestured for her to wait, and disappeared into a nearby teepee. He emerged moments later with a large basket and handed it to her. Then he pointed toward a group of women heading out into the grassland, their own baskets in hand. The message was clear. Go with them. Evelyn's first instinct was to refuse. She wasn't one of them. She wouldn't pretend to be. But Cairo's expression brooked no argument, and the alternative, standing here alone, isolated and vulnerable, seemed worse. She joined the group of women, falling in at the back. They glanced at her, but didn't speak, just continued their conversation in that flowing language, occasionally laughing at jokes Evelyn couldn't understand. They walked for maybe 20 minutes, heading into an area where low bushes grew in dense clusters. The women spread out, beginning to harvest berries from the bushes, their baskets filling steadily. Evelyn watched for a moment, then began picking her own berries. The work was mindless, repetitive, and she fell into the rhythm of it despite herself. Pick, drop in basket, move to the next bush. Over and over. The sun climbed higher, sweat dampened her borrowed dress. Her fingers stained purple from the berries, and thorns pricked her skin, drawing small drops of blood. But she kept working, grateful for the distraction, for something to do besides think. The young woman from the stream, the one who'd washed Evelyn's hair, worked nearby. She hummed while she picked, a melody that rose and fell like wind through grass. It was beautiful, and it made Evelyn's throat tight with homesickness for reasons she couldn't quite name. Najoni, the young woman said suddenly, pointing to herself. Then she pointed to Evelyn questioningly. Evelyn? Evelyn replied. Evelyn. Najoni smiled, repeated the name a few times until she had it right, then went back to humming. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Najoni began pointing to things, speaking their names, much like Cairo had done, teaching her, helping her. Why? Evelyn wanted to ask. Why help me when your people killed my father? But she couldn't form the question, and maybe there was no answer that would make sense anyway. By the time they returned to the village, Evelyn's basket was full, and her back ached from bending. The women dispersed to their own fires, their own families, leaving Evelyn standing alone with her basket of berries, unsure what to do with them. Cairo appeared as if summoned. He took the basket, examined the contents, and gave her a nod that might have been approval. Then he brought her to his fire, where the older woman from his teepee was preparing food. The woman, his mother, Evelyn guessed, based on the way they interacted, took the berries without acknowledgement and began sorting them. Cairo indicated Evelyn should sit, then brought her water and more dried meat. The routine was beginning to establish itself. Work, eat, learn words, sleep. A framework being built around her whether she wanted it or not. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cairo resumed his language lessons. He was more animated now, using gestures and expressions to convey meaning, sometimes acting out entire scenarios to make his point clear. Despite herself, Evelyn found she was learning. The language had a logic to it, patterns that became more apparent the more she heard. She wouldn't be fluent anytime soon, but she was beginning to pick out common words, understand simple phrases. Good, Cairo said when she correctly identified a series of objects he pointed to. The word was in English, heavily accented but unmistakable. She stared at him. You speak English? Little, he said, holding his thumb and forefinger close together. Little English. You... He gestured to her, then to the village. You learn. Here, our words. So he did speak some English, but he wanted her to learn his language instead of relying on his limited vocabulary. It made sense, strategically, but it also felt like another layer of isolation, another thing taken from her. Why? She asked, knowing he might not understand. But he seemed to. His expression grew serious, and he pointed to the village around them, then to her, then back to the village. You here, he said carefully. Here now, must... He struggled for the word, finally settling on must live. Need words to live. The finality in his tone was unmistakable. This wasn't temporary. In his mind, this was her life now. Permanent, irreversible. Rage flared in her chest, hot and sudden. This isn't my home, she said, each word clipped and hard. You took me. You killed my father. You burned everything I... Her voice cracked, and she had to stop. Cairo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Regret, understanding, or just acknowledgement of a truth they both knew. It didn't matter. What was done was done. Learn, he said again, softer this time, is better. Learn. Then he stood and walked away, leaving her alone by the fire. The days began to blur together. Each morning, Evelyn woke to the same routine: food, language lessons, work, sometimes berry picking, sometimes helping prepare hides, sometimes hauling water or gathering firewood. Always under watchful eyes, always accompanied by women who spoke to each other but rarely to her. Najoni was the exception. She seemed determined to befriend Evelyn, chattering away in their language even though Evelyn understood maybe one word in 10. But her presence was not comfort, exactly, but something adjacent to it. A reminder that not everyone here saw her as purely an enemy. Cairo continued the language lessons every evening. He was demanding but never cruel, correcting her pronunciation with patience that surprised her. Sometimes other warriors would join them by the fire, and Evelyn would catch fragments of their conversations, understanding just enough to know they were talking about her. The looks they gave her ranged from dismissive to openly hostile to something that made her skin crawl. But Cairo's presence seemed to create a barrier. When he was near, no one approached her, no one touched her, no one did anything but stare. She should have been grateful, probably was grateful, under all the other emotions. But gratitude felt like betrayal. Of her father, of herself, of everything she'd lost. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Her hands grew calloused from work. Her skin darkened from constant sun. She could hold basic conversations now, understand most of what was said to her even if her responses were still halting and imperfect. The village was preparing for something. She could sense the change in energy, see it in the increased activity. Women sewed new clothing, men checked weapons and gear, children ran wild with excitement. What happens? She asked Najoni one morning, her words still awkward but comprehensible. Hunt, Najoni replied, making a gesture like drawing a bow. Big hunt, buffalo. Buffalo. Evelyn had seen the massive herds from a distance, back when her life was different. Her father had always given them wide berth, respecting their size and unpredictability. Men go? She asked. All go, Najoni corrected. Men hunt, women follow, process meat, make camp. All together. A migration then. The entire village moving to follow the herds. That night, Cairo confirmed it. They would leave in 3 days, he told her in their mixed language of his words and her broken attempts. Everyone would go. She would ride with him, help with the work, learn how they lived. I don't want to go, she said, even knowing it was pointless. You go, he replied, no room for argument in his tone, or stay. Alone. Here. Alone in an empty village, defenseless and isolated. That wasn't a choice at all. The morning they left, the entire village transformed into a moving camp. Teepees came down with practiced efficiency, poles and hides loaded onto travois, pulled by horses. Children were bundled onto horses with their mothers, supplies distributed, everything organized with a precision that spoke of countless repetitions. Evelyn rode with Cairo again, sitting in front of him on the horse, his arm around her waist, keeping her steady. The position had become familiar enough that she didn't tense anymore when he touched her. That fact disturbed her more than the touch itself. The journey took 4 days. They moved steadily across the plains, following paths Evelyn couldn't see, but that clearly existed for those who knew how to read the land. At night, they made temporary camps, fires springing up across the grassland like stars. Cairo kept her close during the journey. She noticed other warriors watching her, noticed the way their gazes lingered, noticed the calculations behind their eyes. And she noticed how Cairo's presence made them look away. He was protecting her from his own people. The realization sat uneasily alongside her hatred. How could she hate someone who protected her? But how could she not hate the person who'd taken her in the first place? On the 4th day, they found the buffalo. The herd stretched across the horizon, thousands of massive beasts grazing peacefully, their collective sound like distant thunder. Evelyn had never seen so many animals in one place. It was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. The hunters prepared immediately. Cairo left Evelyn with Nijoni and the other women, joining the warriors gathering at the edge of camp. They painted their horses, checked their weapons, spoke in low, focused tones. Then they rode out, disappearing into the tall grass. The women waited, tense and silent. Even the children seemed to sense the importance of the moment, staying close to their mothers instead of running wild. Then, distantly, the sound of hoofbeats, shouting, the thunder of the herd beginning to move. The hunters appeared, riding alongside the stampeding buffalo, weaving between the massive animals with terrifying skill. Arrows flew, lances struck, and buffalo began to fall. It was brutal and beautiful and utterly foreign to everything Evelyn knew. She watched, transfixed, as Cairo rode past, his focus absolute, his movements fluid and confident. He was in his element here, part of the hunt in a way that made him seem more alive than she'd ever seen him. The hunt lasted hours. When it ended, dozens of buffalo lay dead across the grassland, and the real work began. The women descended on the carcasses with knives and purpose. Evelyn watched Nijoni approach a fallen buffalo, saw how she spoke softly to it before beginning to cut, a ritual of respect and gratitude. "Come," Nijoni called to Evelyn, gesturing her over. "Help! Learn!" Evelyn had helped butcher chickens and pigs back home, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer scale of a buffalo. Nijoni showed her where to cut, how to remove the hide without damaging it, how to separate the valuable organs from the meat. The work was hard, bloody, and exhausting. By sunset, Evelyn's arms ached, her dress was soaked with blood, and she smelled like death. But around her the camp hummed with satisfaction. Meat was being preserved, hides stretched, bones and organs carefully sorted for later use, nothing wasted, everything honored. That night, there was celebration. Fires burned high, drums echoed across the plains, and people danced and sang. Fresh buffalo meat roasted, its smell making Evelyn's mouth water despite the day's gruesome work. Cairo found her sitting at the edge of the celebration, watching but not participating. He sat beside her without speaking, and they watched together as the dancers moved in complex patterns, their shadows long against the firelight. "You did well today," he said finally, in his careful English. She didn't respond. Accepting the compliment felt like accepting her place here, and she wasn't ready for that. But she also couldn't deny the small flicker of pride. She had done well. had kept up with women who'd been doing this their entire lives, had proven she could work, could contribute, had proven she could survive. Tomorrow, Cairo continued, we teach you more. Meat preservation, hide working. You will learn all. I don't want to learn, she said quietly. I want to go home. He was silent for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it over the drums. Home is gone. The words landed like blows, because they were true. Even if she somehow escaped, even if she made it back to the ranch, what would she find? Ashes, graves, nothing. Home was gone. The question was whether she could build something new from the ruins, or whether she'd be destroyed by the trying. Cairo stood, offered his hand to help her up. She stared at it, that calloused, scarred hand that had dragged her from her burning home, that now offered assistance. The contradiction made her dizzy. But she took it. Let him pull her to her feet, followed him back to their fire, their teepee, their routine. Because what else was there? The hunt continued for 2 more weeks. The village moved as the herds moved, taking what they needed, preserving meat for the lean months ahead. Evelyn worked alongside the other women, her hands growing skilled at tasks she'd never imagined doing. And slowly, terribly, she began to understand them. Not just their language, though her fluency improved daily, but their rhythms, their values, their way of seeing the world, the respect they showed the animals they killed, the care they took with resources, the way they worked together, every person contributing according to their ability. It wasn't evil, wasn't monstrous. It was just different. That should have made things easier. Instead, it made them infinitely more complicated. Because how could she hate people who treated resources with reverence, who cared for their children with obvious love, who worked together with a unity her own scattered frontier communities rarely achieved? But they had killed her father, had destroyed her home, had taken her freedom. Both things were true. Both things existed simultaneously, and Evelyn didn't know how to reconcile them. One evening, as the camp settled in for another night, Najoni invited Evelyn to sit with her and several other young women. They were working on a hide, scraping away the last bits of tissue, and they welcomed Evelyn into their circle without comment. They talked as they worked, and Evelyn found she could follow most of the conversation now. They spoke of everyday things, upcoming marriages, difficult mothers-in-law, children's antics, normal life. Then one of them asked Evelyn a direct question. Do you have a man in your old place? The question caught her off guard. No, she said carefully. I had no husband. Cairo treats you well, another woman observed. It wasn't quite a question, but the implication hung in the air. He is not cruel, Evelyn managed, unsure what else to say. The women exchanged glances, something passing between them that she couldn't quite read. He could have given you to anyone, Najoni said quietly. Many wanted you. He kept you for himself instead. That means something. The words sent ice through Evelyn's veins. Given her to anyone. Like property. Like an object to be distributed. But he hadn't. Had kept her close, taught her, protected her. Why? She didn't want to know the answer, didn't want to think about what it might mean for her future. When she returned to Cairo's fire that night, he was working on a new bow, testing its flexibility. He glanced up when she approached, and something in his expression made her stop. Sit, he said, gesturing to the space across from him. She sat, wary. He continued working for a moment, then set the bow aside. You learn fast, he said, faster than others before. Others before. Other captives. The knowledge that she wasn't the first sat heavy in her stomach. What happened to them? She asked. The others? His expression shuddered. Some adapted, made lives. Some, he trailed off, shrugging. Some could not. Could not. Such a simple phrase for what she suspected was a brutal truth. I need you to understand, Cairo said carefully, his English stilted but clear enough. I did not take you to be cruel. I took you because, he struggled for words, because you would have died anyway. Soldiers come after raids, kill everyone left. This way you live. The logic was twisted, horrifying, but she understood what he was saying. In his mind, he'd saved her, taken her as an alternative to leaving her to die. It didn't make it right. didn't erase what he'd done, but it complicated the hatred she wanted to feel, adding layers she didn't know how to process. "My father," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "Did you—" "No," he said immediately. "Not me. I did not kill your father. But you were there. You were part of it. Yes." No excuses, no justifications, just acknowledgement. They sat in silence, the weight of that admission hanging between them. Finally, Cairo spoke again. "I cannot change what happened, cannot give back what was taken, but I can give you this, a place here, a life, choice in what that life becomes." "What choice?" Evelyn asked bitterly. "I'm a captive." "For now," he agreed, "but captives can become members, can choose to stay, to belong. You learn our ways, learn our language. You choose whether to fight forever or to live." The words echoed what she'd been grappling with for weeks. Fight or adapt, resist or survive, hold on to rage or find a way forward. She didn't have an answer, wasn't sure there was an answer, but as she lay down to sleep that night, her last thought wasn't of escape or revenge. It was of Najoni's kindness, of the satisfaction she'd felt learning to work the buffalo hide, of the way Cairo's protection had kept her safe. Small things, terrible things, things that shouldn't matter but somehow did. And in the darkness, Evelyn Carter began to understand the most terrifying truth of all. She was changing. Not because she wanted to, but because surviving meant adapting, and adapting meant becoming something new. The question was whether that new person would destroy what remained of the old one, or whether both could somehow exist, fractured and complicated in the same scarred skin. The realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like dawn breaking over the plains, so gradual that Evelyn didn't notice until the light had already changed everything. It started the morning she woke and reached for the leather dress without thinking. No hesitation, no moment of grief for the nightgown that had burned. Just automatic movement, muscle memory, accepting what her mind still resisted. She froze halfway through pulling it over her head, the leather soft against her skin, and the enormity of that simple action hit her like a fist to the chest. When had this become normal? When had she stopped fighting every small surrender? But she finished dressing anyway, because the alternative was freezing, and survival had taught her that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. The village had returned from the buffalo hunt 3 days ago, settling back into its permanent location as autumn deepened across the plains. The air had grown crisp, mornings touched with frost that melted by midday. Women were preparing for winter with renewed urgency, drying the last of the meat, reinforcing teepees against coming storms, gathering and storing every resource they could find. Evelyn had been pulled into this work without question. Her hands knew how to stretch hides now, how to cut meat into thin strips for drying, how to identify which plants were worth gathering and which would poison you. Knowledge she'd never wanted, settling into her bones like sediment. Cairo found her outside, helping Najoni repair a tear in a hide. He watched for a moment, something unreadable in his expression, then spoke. "Come," he said, "I need to show you something." Najoni made a shooing gesture, grinning in a way that made Evelyn suspicious, but she stood and followed Cairo through the village. They walked past the outer circle of teepees, past the horse corral, into the grassland beyond. He led her to a spot where the land rose slightly, offering a view of the village below and the plains stretching endlessly in every direction. The sun hung low, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. "Beautiful, yes?" Cairo said. "Yes," Evelyn admitted, because it was. Heartbreakingly beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. "This land," Cairo continued, his English still halting but improving, "it does not belong to anyone. We belong to it. You understand?" She wasn't sure she did, but she nodded anyway. He was quiet for a moment, then, "Traders come tomorrow." The word sent electricity through her. Traders meant white men, meant people who spoke her language, who came from her world, meant, potentially, a way out. Her face must have shown something because Cairo's expression shifted. Not quite sadness, but something close. "You will see them," he said carefully. "You will speak with them if you want. I will not stop you." The implication hung unspoken between them. The traders might take her back, might return her to her people, to civilization, to to everything she'd lost. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Because you should know, should choose." He met her eyes directly, and she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. "I want you to choose." That night, Evelyn barely slept. She lay in the darkness, listening to Cairo's steady breathing across the fire, and tried to imagine it, going back, finding her way to the nearest town, to people who looked like her and spoke her language. Starting over somehow, building a new life from the ashes of the old one. It should have been everything she wanted, but when she tried to picture it, tried to see herself in a town wearing a proper dress and speaking only English and pretending the last 2 months hadn't happened, the image wouldn't come into focus. Like looking at something through warped glass. And worse, far worse, when she tried to imagine never seeing Cairo again, never hearing Najoni's laugh, never feeling the satisfaction of completing a difficult task alongside the other women. Something in her chest twisted with what felt dangerously close to grief. She hated herself for it, hated that she'd grown comfortable here, that she'd found moments of contentment among the people who'd destroyed her life. It felt like betrayal, like her father's death meant nothing if she could adapt this easily. But easy wasn't the right word. Nothing about this had been easy. The traders arrived at midday, their wagon rumbling into view with 3 rough-looking men and a collection of goods, blankets, metal tools, rifles, whiskey. The kind of men who traded with anyone who had something worth exchanging, morality negotiable depending on profit margins. The village gathered to examine their wares. Evelyn stayed back, watching from a distance as negotiations began in a mixture of broken English, Spanish, and hand gestures. Cairo stood among the warriors, his attention seeming focused on a new rifle the traders had brought, but she caught him glancing her direction more than once. One of the traders noticed her. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with calculation. He said something to his companions, and they all turned to look. Evelyn's skin crawled under their stares. She recognized that look, had seen it before on men who came through her father's ranch. The look that saw women as commodities, opportunities, things to be acquired. The trader who'd spotted her first approached the group of warriors, speaking in loud, slow English, as if volume could bridge the language gap. "That girl there," he said, pointing at Evelyn. "White girl. Where'd you get her?" Several warriors understood enough English to respond. There was a brief exchange, the trader's expression growing more interested by the moment. "I'll trade for her," he announced. "Good price. 3 rifles, 2 crates of ammunition, and 6 bottles of whiskey." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She was being bargained for like livestock. But Cairo stepped forward, his voice cutting through the trader's pitch. "No," he said in clear English. "She is not for trade." "Everything's for trade, friend," the trader said with an oily smile. "Just a matter of finding the right price. 4 rifles? No price." Cairo's tone left no room for negotiation. "She stays." The trader's eyes shifted between Cairo and Evelyn, calculating. "She your woman?" The question hung in the air. Evelyn waited for Cairo to explain, captive, servant, whatever word he'd used to describe her ambiguous status. Instead, he said simply, "Yes." The single word changed everything. It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth, but it was also protection. A claim that meant the traders would back off, that she wouldn't be sold like property. But it also trapped her in a new way, defined her in terms she hadn't agreed to. The trader shrugged, disappointed but not surprised. "Suit yourself, just thought she might want to go back to her own people." He raised his voice, addressing Evelyn directly now. "That what you want, girl? Want us to take you back to civilization?" Every eye in the village turned to her, waiting, watching. This was it, her chance. These men would take her if she asked, and Cairo had said he wouldn't stop her. She could leave right now, climb into that wagon, and never look back. She opened her mouth. The word yes formed in her throat, but what came out was no. The trader looked surprised. "No? You sure about that? These people killed your family, didn't they? Took you in a raid?" "I'm sure," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm staying." She didn't look at Cairo as she said it, couldn't bear to see whatever expression might be on his face. But she felt the shift in the air around them, felt the warriors relax slightly, heard what might have been approval in someone's quiet comment. The trader spat into the dirt. "Your funeral, girl. Don't come crying when you regret it." But he let it drop, returning to the business of trading goods for furs and dried meat. And Evelyn stood there, shaking with the magnitude of what she'd just done. She'd chosen to stay, actively, deliberately chosen this life over the possibility of return. The question was why. That evening, after the traders had left and the village settled back into routine, Cairo found her sitting by the stream where the women washed clothes. The water reflected the sunset, turning the surface into liquid fire. He sat beside her without speaking, and they watched the light fade together. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "Why did you tell them I was your woman?" "To protect you," he said simply. "Those men, they would have bought you, used you badly, sold you to someone worse. This way, you are protected. By being claimed as yours." "Yes." He didn't apologize for it, didn't try to soften the reality. "And if I'd said yes? If I'd asked them to take me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I would have let you go, as I said." She believed him. That was the strange part. She actually believed he would have honored his word, even though keeping her was clearly what he wanted. "I don't understand you," she said, frustration bleeding into her voice. "You took me from my home. You were part of the raid that killed my father, but you protect me, teach me, treat me with more respect than those traitors who share my skin." She turned to look at him directly. "Why?" Cairo met her gaze, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his eyes, vulnerability. "Because I see you," he said quietly. "Not captive, not enemy. You. Strong, brave, learning so fast. Working hard, not complaining. You could have broken. Many do, but you bend instead. Become stronger." He paused. "I respect this. Respect you." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything she thought she understood. "That doesn't change what happened," she said. "Doesn't bring my father back." "No," he agreed. "Nothing changes past. But maybe," he struggled for the words, "maybe we change what comes next." "How?" "By choosing," he said. "You chose to stay today. That is beginning." "Beginning of what?" He didn't answer, just stood and offered his hand. She looked at it, that scarred, calloused hand that had dragged her into this life, and made another choice. She took it. The days that followed felt different, lighter somehow, though nothing external had changed. Evelyn worked alongside the women, continued her language lessons with Cairo, participated in the daily rhythms of village life. But the weight of constant resistance had lifted, replaced by something she didn't quite have a name for yet. Acceptance, maybe. Or the beginning of it. Najoni noticed the change immediately. "You are different now," she said one afternoon as they worked on tanning a hide together. "Softer, less like stone." "Is that good?" Evelyn asked. Najoni smiled. "Stone is strong but breaks under too much pressure. You are learning to flow like water instead. Water is stronger." The metaphor was lost on Evelyn, but she appreciated the intent. Najoni had been her first friend here, the first person to show her kindness without agenda. That meant something. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said carefully. "Always." "The others, the captives before me, what happened to them?" Najoni's expression grew somber. Some became members. Married, had children, lived full lives. Some could not adapt. They grew sick with sadness, faded away. One tried to escape. She paused. "She died in the attempt. The land is not forgiving to those who do not know it." "And you think I'll survive? Become a member?" "I think you already are," Najoni said gently. "You just have not admitted it yet." The words stayed with Evelyn long after the conversation ended. Was it true? Had she already crossed some invisible line without realizing it? That night, Cairo taught her a new skill: how to make the small beaded decorations that adorned clothing and personal items. His large hands worked the tiny beads with surprising delicacy, creating patterns that held meaning she was only beginning to understand. "Each design tells a story," he explained, showing her a bracelet with geometric patterns in red and white. "This one speaks of a successful hunt. This one," he pointed to another section, "of courage in battle." "What story would my design tell?" she asked. He considered this, then began selecting beads: white, blue, black. His hands moved quickly, creating a pattern that emerged into something that looked almost like a horizon line, earth meeting sky. Two worlds, he said, holding it up, meeting, becoming one. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it struck her nonetheless. Two worlds. That's what she was now, caught between, belonging fully to neither but carrying pieces of both. "Can I keep it?" she asked. Cairo smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded, and tied it around her wrist. "It is yours." She traced the pattern with her finger, this small thing that represented her impossible position. And for the first time since the raid, she felt something other than grief or rage or confusion. She felt possibility. The shift in her relationship with Cairo didn't go unnoticed by the village. The warriors began treating her with more respect, acknowledging her presence rather than looking through her. The women included her more readily in their conversations, asked her opinions, laughed at her still awkward attempts at their language. Even Cairo's mother, the stern older woman who'd been cold since the beginning, began to soften. One morning she actually offered Evelyn food first, before serving the men, a small gesture that held significance. Evelyn was only beginning to understand. "She accepts you now," Nijoni explained later, "sees you as part of Cairo's household, not just property." "What changed?" "You did. And Cairo, the way he looks at you now. Everyone can see it." "See what?" Nijoni laughed. "That he cares for you, not as captive, as woman he values." The observation made Evelyn's stomach flip. She'd been trying not to think about the growing complexity of her feelings toward Cairo, the way her heart rate increased when he was near, the way she'd started looking forward to their evening lessons. It was wrong, impossible, a betrayal of everything she'd lost, but it was also undeniably real. 2 weeks after the trader's visit, a group of warriors returned from a scouting mission with troubling news. Evelyn couldn't follow the rapid conversation, but she caught enough words to understand the basics. Soldiers, moving through the territory, burning villages. The atmosphere in the camp shifted immediately. Warriors gathered in urgent councils. Women began quietly packing valuable items, preparing for the possibility of having to move quickly. Fear rippled through the village like wind through grass. Cairo found Evelyn and pulled her aside. "There's danger coming," he said. "Army soldiers. They hunt our people, punish for raids. We may need to move camp, go to winter grounds early." "How much danger?" she asked. His expression was grim. "Much. They do not ask questions, do not care who is guilty. They see our people, they attack." "Even women? Children?" "Especially women and children. Easier targets." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "They say we are savages, but they kill babies and call it justice." Evelyn thought of the traders, of the soldiers she'd seen in towns growing up, rough men who saw the frontier as theirs to tame, anyone in their way as obstacles to remove. She'd heard stories of massacres, of entire villages wiped out, had dismissed them as exaggerations. Now she wasn't so sure. "What will we do?" she asked. "We pack. Be ready to move fast if scouts report soldiers close. And if they come," he touched the knife at his belt, "we fight." That night, the village worked by firelight, breaking down less essential items, preparing horses, making ready for rapid departure. Evelyn helped where she could, her hands knowing the work now, her body moving in sync with the women around her. At one point, she found herself working beside Cairo's mother, both of them rolling up sleeping furs. The older woman glanced at her, then spoke in their language. "You work hard. Good." It was the first direct compliment she'd received from the woman. Evelyn felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she replied, carefully pronouncing the words in the woman's language. The older woman nodded, then added something else that Evelyn didn't quite catch. But Nijoni, passing by with an armload of supplies, heard and translated with a grin. "She says Cairo chose well, that you will make strong children." Evelyn nearly dropped the furs. "What?" But Cairo's mother had already moved on, leaving Evelyn standing there, face burning, mind reeling from the implication. Strong children, as if her future here was decided, as if she and Cairo were, Do not look so shocked, Najoni said, still grinning. Everyone has seen how things are between you two. It is only matter of time. There is nothing between us, Evelyn protested, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. If you say so, Najoni said, clearly not believing her. But you should know, if you are to be with Cairo, truly with him, there will be ceremony, recognition. It would change your status completely, from captive to wife, from outsider to member. The word wife made Evelyn's heart race. She couldn't be considering this, couldn't actually be thinking about permanently binding herself to the man who'd taken her, to this life that had been forced upon her. But she was thinking about it, had been thinking about it, she realized, since the moment she'd told the traders no. That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn slipped out of the teepee and walked to the edge of the village. The plains stretched endlessly under the stars, vast and indifferent to human drama. Somewhere out there, soldiers hunted them. Somewhere behind her, the ashes of her old life had long since blown away. She heard footsteps and turned to find Cairo approaching. You should not be alone, he said. Not safe. I needed to think. About? She gestured to the darkness, to everything. All of it. What I'm doing here. What I've become. What I might become. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool night air. And what do you think? I think, she said slowly, that I died in that raid. The person I was, she's gone, burned up with the house. And who are you now? I don't know yet. Someone new. Someone who exists between two worlds and doesn't quite fit in either. She looked at him. Someone who understands why her captors did what they did, even though it destroyed her. Someone who hates that understanding but can't unknow it. Cairo listened in silence, his expression shadowed in the starlight. Someone, Evelyn continued, her voice dropping almost to a whisper, who is starting to care about the person who took her, and who doesn't know what to do with that. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and terrifying. Cairo reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. I have cared for you since the beginning, he said quietly. Saw your strength in the flames, your courage even in fear. Took you because I could not bear to leave you to soldiers who would have done worse. Selfish, perhaps, but true. You're saying you took me because you wanted me? I am saying I took you because I saw who you could become. And I was right. He leaned closer, and Evelyn knew he was going to kiss her. Knew she should pull away, should maintain some boundary, some last connection to the person she'd been. Instead, she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. Then deeper, charged with weeks of tension and denied attraction and the terrible, complicated truth of what they were to each other. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn was shaking. This is insane, she whispered. This is wrong. Perhaps, Cairo agreed, or perhaps this is the only thing that makes sense. He took her hand, the one wearing the bracelet he'd made, and pressed it against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, steady and strong. I cannot change the past, he said. Cannot undo the raid or bring back your father, but I can offer you future. Different future. With me. If you choose it. There was that word again. Choose. She'd chosen to stay when the traders came. Chosen to learn the language, to work alongside the women, to participate in this life rather than merely endure it. Now Cairo was asking her to make a bigger choice. To not just survive here, but to commit to it. To him. I need time, she said finally. To think. To be sure. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Take time. But know this. Soldiers come closer each day. Time is something we may not have much of. The warning proved prophetic. 3 days later, just before dawn, the scouts returned at a gallop. Evelyn woke to shouting, to the urgent sounds of a camp mobilizing for danger. She emerged from the teepee to find controlled chaos. Warriors arming themselves, women frantically packing, children being bundled onto horses. The sky was just beginning to gray in the east, painting everything in shades of silver. Cairo appeared, already dressed for battle, weapons at his belt. Soldiers, he said tersely. Half a day's ride, coming this direction. We move now. The village broke down with terrifying speed. Teepees came apart in minutes, belongings loaded onto travois, fires extinguished. Within an hour, they were moving, a long line of people and horses heading southwest at a steady lope. Evelyn rode with Cairo again, his arm tight around her waist, and for the first time she wasn't his captive being transported. She was someone he was protecting, someone whose safety mattered to him. The difference was everything. They rode hard for most of the day, pausing only to rest the horses. Scouts ranged ahead and behind, watching for pursuit. The mood was tense, frightened, and Evelyn understood with sickening clarity that her people, the army she'd once trusted to protect settlers, were the monsters these people fled from. As evening approached, they reached a hidden canyon, sheltered and defensible. The village made camp quickly, quietly, fires kept small to avoid detection. Cairo stationed Evelyn with the women and children in the most protected part of the canyon, then joined the warriors at the perimeter. She watched him go, fear coiling in her stomach. Not fear of him, but fear for him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was in love with him, despite everything, despite the impossible, complicated, terrible circumstances, despite her father's death and her stolen life and every logical reason to hate him. She loved him, and now, with soldiers hunting them, she might lose him before she'd ever fully admitted it. Njoni found her standing frozen, staring after the warriors. "He will be fine," she said, trying to sound confident. "Cairo is one of our best fighters. That doesn't mean he's invincible." "No," Njoni admitted, "but it means he has more reason than most to survive." She squeezed Evelyn's hand. "You are his reason now." The night passed with agonizing slowness. Evelyn couldn't sleep, couldn't rest, could only wait and listen for sounds of approach. Around her, other women kept similar vigils, their fear a tangible presence in the darkness. Dawn came without attack, then midday, then evening again. The scouts reported that the soldiers had passed to the east, missing the canyon entirely. The village had escaped detection. Relief flooded through the camp, but it was tempered by grim knowledge. This time they'd been lucky. Next time they might not be. Cairo returned to their fire as full darkness fell. He looked exhausted, tension finally draining from his shoulders now that the immediate danger had passed. Evelyn met him halfway, and without thinking, without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him. He stiffened in surprise, then pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, neither speaking, just holding on to each other in the aftermath of fear. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn looked up at him and made her decision. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes?" he echoed, uncertain. "To your offer, to a future with you, to all of it, yes." Understanding bloomed across his face, followed by something that looked like joy. Pure, unguarded joy that transformed his whole expression. "You are certain?" "I'm terrified," she admitted, "and I don't know if this is the right choice or the worst mistake of my life. But I know that when I thought you might die today, I couldn't breathe. So yes, I choose this. I choose you." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Evelyn kissed him back with equal fervor. Around them, people tactfully looked away, but she caught Njoni's delighted smile, saw Cairo's mother nodding with what might have been approval. When they came up for air, Cairo pressed his forehead against hers. "I will speak to the elders tomorrow. We will have ceremony. You will become my wife in all ways that matter." "Wife," Evelyn repeated, testing the word. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like coming home. That night, she lay beside Cairo. Not across the fire, but next to him, his arm around her waist, his warmth solid and real against her back. Tomorrow would bring ceremony and formality and the final severing of her connection to her old life. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Evelyn Carter took stock of who she'd become. She was no longer the terrified captive dragged from a burning ranch. She was no longer the grief-stricken girl who'd watched her father die. She was someone new, someone forged in fire and survival, shaped by impossible circumstances into a person who could love her captor without forgetting what he'd taken, who could find home among enemies without dishonoring the dead. She was Evelyn, and tomorrow she would also be Cairo's wife. Two truths, both real, both permanent. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. The ceremony took place 3 days later, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Evelyn stood in the center of the village, dressed in new clothes Najoni and the other women had spent 2 days preparing. The dress was softer than anything she'd worn before, decorated with intricate beadwork that told stories she was only beginning to understand. Her hair had been braided with strips of red cloth, and someone had painted her face with careful symbols in ochre and white. She barely recognized herself. But maybe that was the point. The elders gathered around her in Cairo, speaking words in their language that flowed like water over stones. She understood most of it now, promises of loyalty, of partnership, of two lives becoming one path. Cairo responded in a voice steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers. When it was her turn to speak, Evelyn felt the weight of every gaze in the village. This was the moment where she could still back out, could refuse, could cling to the last shreds of her old identity. Instead, she spoke the words Najoni had taught her, her pronunciation careful but clear. Words that meant she accepted this life, this man, this future. Words that severed her final ties to the girl she'd been and claimed the woman she'd become. Cairo's smile when she finished was worth every complicated feeling churning in her chest. The elder woman who'd led the ceremony, ancient and bent but with eyes sharp as obsidian, placed Cairo's hand over Evelyn's. Then she wrapped both their hands with a woven cord, binding them together, and spoke a final blessing. It was done. Evelyn was married. The village erupted in celebration. Drums began to beat. People sang, and food appeared from seemingly nowhere, precious stores brought out for this occasion. Children danced between the adults, and even the warriors who'd regarded Evelyn with suspicion now approached with congratulations. Cairo's mother embraced her, actually embraced her, and said something that made Najoni laugh and translate. She says welcome to the family, and she hopes you give her many grandchildren soon. Evelyn's face burned, but she managed to smile. Tell her I'll do my best. The celebration lasted well into the night. Evelyn found herself pulled into dances she didn't know, taught the steps by laughing women who corrected her mistakes with good-natured teasing. She ate food that tasted like home, despite being nothing like what her mother used to make. She listened to stories told in a language that was becoming hers, understanding more with each passing hour. And through it all, Cairo stayed close. Not possessively, but present. A steady warmth at her side, his hand finding hers in the crowd, his smile proud whenever she navigated some new social complexity successfully. When the fires finally burned low and people began drifting toward their teepees, Cairo led her back to theirs. His mother had already retreated to stay with relatives for the night, giving them privacy. Inside, the space felt different, more intimate. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the furs had been arranged into a proper sleeping area, their sleeping area now. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd known this was coming, had accepted it as part of the commitment she was making, but knowing and experiencing were different things. Cairo seemed to sense her nervousness. He moved slowly, giving her space, his earlier confidence replaced by something gentler. "We do not have to," he started. "No," she interrupted. "I want to. She struggled for the words. "I'm just trying to reconcile wanting you with everything that brought us here." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The past does not disappear because we choose a future. It stays with us, becomes part of who we are." "How do you live with it?" she asked. "The raids, the violence, the taking of captives. How do you reconcile doing those things with being the person you are now? With me?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "I tell myself it is survival. That we raid because soldiers and settlers push us from our lands, kill our people, force us to take what we need to live. That captives are mercy compared to leaving them to die." He met her eyes. "But truth? I do not always reconcile it. I carry the weight of it, the faces of those I have hurt. Your father," his voice caught. "I did not kill him, but I was there. I am responsible." The admission hung between them, raw and painful. "I should hate you for that," Evelyn whispered. "Yes, you should. But I don't. I can't, even though part of me thinks I should." She moved closer to him. "Does that make me a traitor to his memory?" "No," Cairo said firmly. "It makes you someone who chooses to live rather than be destroyed by grief." Your father, he would want you to survive, yes? Yes, she admitted. Her father had been practical above all else. He would have understood survival, even if the form it took would have shocked him. Then honor him by living well, by finding joy where you can, by building something new from what was lost. Cairo reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. We cannot change what brought us here, but we can choose what we make of it. Evelyn leaned into his touch, closing the last distance between them. When they kissed this time, it wasn't tentative or uncertain. It was claiming and accepting in equal measure, two people choosing each other despite everything that should have kept them apart. That night, they became husband and wife in all the ways that mattered. And if Evelyn cried afterward, tears for what she'd lost mixed with tears for what she'd found, Cairo held her through it, his own eyes suspiciously bright in the firelight. The peaceful interlude lasted exactly 2 weeks. Evelyn had just begun to settle into her new role as Cairo's wife, learning the expectations and responsibilities that came with it, when the scouts returned with news that drained the color from every face. Soldiers, not just passing through this time, but actively hunting. They'd found the remains of a village 2 days' ride north, had tracked survivors, and were moving systematically through the territory, leaving destruction in their wake. The village council met immediately. Evelyn sat outside the circle. Women weren't typically included in war councils, but close enough to hear, her language skills now good enough to follow most of the discussion. The debate was heated. Some argued for running, for taking the village deeper into the wilderness where soldiers rarely ventured. Others wanted to stand and fight to defend their territory rather than constantly fleeing. Still others suggested splitting up, making it harder for the army to find them all. Cairo's voice cut through the arguments, calm and strategic. We cannot outrun them forever. The army has horses, supplies, more men than we can count. If we run, they will find us eventually. If we split up, we lose our strength in numbers. So you suggest we fight? One of the older warriors challenged. We are outnumbered 5-1, maybe more. I suggest we be smart, Cairo replied. We know this land better than any soldier. We use that advantage. Set traps, create diversions, make it costly for them to continue hunting us. Force them to decide we are not worth the effort. And if they do not give up? Cairo's expression was grim. Then we fight. But on our terms, not theirs. The council eventually agreed to Cairo's strategy, though Evelyn could see the fear in their faces. These were people who'd survived by avoiding direct confrontation, by moving and adapting rather than standing their ground. Fighting the army was a last resort, and everyone knew it. Preparations began immediately. The warriors worked with renewed intensity, checking weapons, planning ambush sites, organizing defensive positions. The women prepared supplies for rapid movement, hiding caches of food and essential items in locations they could return to if the village was destroyed. Evelyn worked alongside them, her hands moving through familiar tasks while her mind raced with terrible possibilities. She'd seen what happened when her people went to war. The scorched earth, the bodies, the total destruction left in their wake. That night, lying beside Cairo, she couldn't stay silent. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. You could take your family, some of the others who'd come with you, and go far from here. Start over somewhere the army won't find you. And leave everyone else to die? He shook his head. I am a warrior. These are my people. I cannot abandon them. Even if staying means dying? Even then. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. This is who I am, Evelyn, who I have always been. If you cannot accept that, I accept it, she interrupted. I just don't have to like it. He pulled her close, and she buried her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. How many more times would she hear that sound? How many more nights did they have before soldiers came and took this fragile happiness away? If something happens to me, Cairo said quietly, Najoni and my mother will care for you. You will not be alone. Don't, Evelyn said sharply. Don't talk like you're already dead. I am being practical. You taught me that. Always have a plan. My plan is for you to survive. Then we want the same thing. He kissed the top of her head. Sleep now. Tomorrow we move to the winter grounds early. Better defensive position there. But Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay awake long after Cairo's breathing had evened out. staring at the darkness and trying not to think about all the ways this could end. The move to the winter grounds took 3 days of hard travel. The location was a valley sheltered by steep cliffs on 3 sides, with a narrow entrance that could be easily defended. A small river ran through it, and there were caves in the cliff faces where supplies and people could hide if necessary. It was as close to a fortress as a nomadic people could create, but it was also a trap if the soldiers found them. Only one way in meant only one way out. The village had barely settled when the first attack came. It happened at dawn, when the light was still gray and uncertain. Evelyn woke to the sound of gunfire, a sound she'd tried to forget but would never escape. And Cairo was already moving, grabbing his weapons, shouting orders. "Stay in the teepee," he commanded. "Do not come out until I return." But he'd barely made it outside when an explosion rocked the valley. Someone had thrown dynamite at the entrance, trying to collapse it and trap everyone inside. Chaos erupted. Warriors rushed toward the entrance to defend it. Women grabbed children and ran for the caves. Horses screamed and bolted. Smoke from the explosion mixed with morning mist, creating a choking fog that made it impossible to see more than a few feet. Evelyn ignored Cairo's command and ran outside. Around her, the village was dissolving into panic. She spotted Najoni trying to corral several terrified children and ran to help, grabbing the smallest and pushing them toward the caves. "Where's Cairo?" Najoni shouted over the noise. "The entrance!" Evelyn pointed toward the sound of fighting. Gunfire echoed off the cliff walls, making it impossible to tell how many soldiers there were. Could be 20, could be 100. The warriors were holding the entrance, using the narrow passage to their advantage. But Evelyn could hear the soldiers calling to each other, could hear them organizing for a more coordinated assault. She got the children to the caves, handed them off to the older women already there, then turned back to see what else needed doing. That's when she saw him. A soldier had somehow scaled the cliff wall on the eastern side, was perched on a ledge overlooking the village with a rifle aimed directly at the entrance. At Cairo, Evelyn didn't think. She grabbed a rock from the ground and threw it with all her strength. It fell short, but the movement caught the soldier's attention. He swung the rifle toward her instead. Time seemed to slow. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel aimed at her chest, knew she was about to die. Then Cairo was there, slamming into her and driving them both to the ground as the shot cracked overhead. They rolled behind a boulder, Cairo covering her body with his, and more shots followed, kicking up dirt around them. "I told you to stay in the teepee," he shouted. "He was going to shoot you." And now he is shooting at both of us. But despite his anger, his arms were tight around her, protective even in his fury. The soldier on the ledge was reloading. Cairo pulled his bow, knocked an arrow with practiced speed, and loosed it in one smooth motion. The soldier jerked, dropped his rifle, and fell from the ledge. Evelyn looked away before he hit the ground. More explosions rocked the entrance. The soldiers were trying to force their way through, using dynamite to clear the defensive positions. Several warriors fell back, wounded, and Evelyn saw blood spreading across the dirt. "We cannot hold them," Cairo said grimly. He looked toward the caves, calculating. "We need to get everyone into the caves, then collapse the entrance behind us. Trap ourselves in, but keep the soldiers out." How long could we survive trapped in caves? Long enough. There are passages through the caves, old paths that lead to the other side of the mountain. We would lose everything here, but we would live. It was a terrible choice, but better than the alternative. Cairo shouted orders to the other warriors, and they began an organized retreat. The women helped the wounded toward the caves while the warriors provided covering fire. Evelyn found herself helping carry an older man who'd taken a bullet to the leg. He was heavy, and every step was agony, but she kept moving, kept pushing toward safety. They were almost to the caves when another explosion went off, this one inside the valley. A soldier must have thrown dynamite over the wall, and it landed near a cluster of teepees. Fire erupted immediately. The dry hides caught like kindling, flames leaping from one structure to the next. Smoke billowed thick and black, and Evelyn heard screaming from somewhere in the chaos. Someone was trapped. She started toward the flames, but Cairo caught her arm. "No, it is too dangerous. Someone's in there. They are already dead." His face was anguished. "We cannot save them." But the screaming continued, high and terrified, and Evelyn recognized the voice. One of Najoni's younger cousins, a girl maybe 12 years old. She tore free from Cairo's grip and ran toward the burning teepees. The heat was overwhelming. Smoke filled her lungs, made her eyes stream. She couldn't see, could barely breathe, but she pushed forward, following the sound of crying. She found the girl trapped under a fallen pole, the fire creeping closer. Evelyn grabbed the pole and heaved, her muscles screaming, and managed to lift it enough for the girl to scramble free. They ran back toward the caves together, the girl sobbing against Evelyn's side. Behind them, the teepees collapsed in a shower of sparks. Cairo was waiting at the cave entrance, his face a mask of fury and fear. He grabbed Evelyn the moment she was close enough, checking her for injuries even as he berated her. "Foolish, reckless, you could have died." "But I didn't," she coughed, her throat raw from smoke. "And neither did she." He pulled her against him, and she felt him shaking. "Do not do that again. I cannot lose you." "Then don't die in battle," she shot back. "Fair trade." Despite everything, he almost smiled. Then another explosion forced them deeper into the caves, and the warriors began collapsing the entrance behind them. The darkness inside was absolute. Evelyn clung to Cairo as the sounds of battle became muffled, then distant, then gone. Around them, people wept, tended wounds, tried to comfort terrified children. They were alive. They were safe for now. But they'd lost everything else. Hours passed in the darkness. Someone eventually managed to light torches, and the caves became visible in flickering orange light. They were extensive, reaching deep into the mountain, with passages branching in multiple directions. Cairo organized search parties to explore the passages, looking for the exit he'd mentioned. The wounded were settled in a wider chamber, and Evelyn helped tend them with supplies they'd managed to grab before retreating. The injuries ranged from minor burns to serious gunshot wounds. She'd never done this kind of work before, but necessity made her capable. She cleaned wounds with water from an underground stream, applied poultices the medicine woman directed her to make, held hands, and offered comfort where healing was beyond her skill. A young warrior died despite their efforts. He'd been shot in the stomach, and there was nothing anyone could do. Evelyn sat with him at the end, holding his hand while he asked for his mother. When it was over, she walked away from the others and vomited in a dark corner, her whole body shaking with the horror of it all. Cairo found her there. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into his arms and let her cry. "I killed someone today," she whispered. "The soldier on the ledge. You shot him, but he was aiming at me because I drew his attention. I killed him." "You saved my life," Cairo corrected gently. "Both things are true." She pulled back to look at him. "How do you carry it? The weight of taking lives?" "By remembering why I did it, by honoring their deaths through how I live." He cupped her face in his hands. "You are not a killer, Evelyn. You are a survivor. There is a difference." She wanted to believe him, wanted to separate necessity from cruelty, defense from aggression, but the weight in her chest suggested it wasn't that simple. The search parties returned with good news. They'd found the passage through the mountain. It was narrow and difficult, would take time to get everyone through, but it was passable. They began the exodus immediately. Single file through passages so tight that people had to turn sideways, carrying what little they'd brought into the caves. Children whimpered in the darkness. The wounded had to be carried, their moans echoing off stone walls. Evelyn helped where she could, carrying supplies, guiding the elderly, keeping the group moving. Hours blurred together in the darkness, time losing meaning when you couldn't see the sun. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged on the other side of the mountain. The light was blinding after so long in darkness, and Evelyn had to shield her eyes against the afternoon sun. They'd made it. They were free. But the cost was evident on every face. They'd lost their homes, their supplies, many of their possessions. People were injured, traumatized, exhausted, and they had no idea if the soldiers were still hunting them. Cairo gathered the warriors for a quick council. They decided to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the soldiers before making camp. They walked until dark, then into the night, stopping only when people literally couldn't take another step. The camp they made was sparse. No teepees, just people huddled around small fires, sharing blankets and what little food they had. Evelyn sat with Cairo, his arm around her shoulders, and stared into the flames. Around them, the survivors of the attack did the same, each lost in their own thoughts. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. We survive, Cairo said simply. We find a new place to settle. We rebuild. It is what we have always done. And the soldiers? They will come again, or others will. This land that was ours is being taken piece by piece, and we cannot stop it, only delay it. His voice was heavy with the weight of inevitability. But we are not defeated yet. While we breathe, while we fight, we are not defeated. Evelyn thought about that, about survival and resistance, about building and losing and building again, about the endless cycle of violence that trapped both sides in patterns neither could escape. There has to be another way, she said. If there is, I do not know it. Cairo looked at her, and in his eyes she saw resignation mixed with determination. All I know is I will protect what is mine, my people, my family, you. She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. They'd survived today. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new impossible choices, but they'd face it together. And somehow, despite everything, that was enough to keep moving forward. Around them, the fires burned low as exhausted people finally gave in to sleep. Tomorrow they would assess their losses, plan their next move, begin the slow process of rebuilding. But tonight, they simply existed. Survivors of another battle, another loss, another reminder that the life they'd built was fragile as morning frost. Evelyn closed her eyes and felt Cairo's heartbeat against her cheek. Steady, strong, alive. They were both alive. For now, that would have to be victory enough. The dawn came cold and unforgiving, painting the temporary camp in shades of gray that matched the mood of its inhabitants. Evelyn woke with Cairo's arms still around her, his breath warm against her neck, and for a moment she let herself pretend they were back in their teepee, safe and settled. Then reality crashed back. The hard ground beneath them, the smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes, the soft sounds of people crying as they counted their losses. They'd survived the attack, but survival felt hollow when so much had been taken. She sat up carefully, not wanting to wake Cairo. He'd been awake most of the night, standing watch with the other warriors, ensuring the soldiers hadn't followed them through the mountain. The exhaustion showed in the lines around his eyes, the heaviness in his shoulders even in sleep. Around the camp, others were beginning to stir. Nizoni emerged from beneath a shared blanket with her mother and younger siblings, her usual bright expression dimmed by worry. Cairo's mother moved through the camp checking on people, her face carved from stone, showing no emotion despite the loss of everything she'd owned. Strength, Evelyn was learning, looked different here. It wasn't about never breaking. It was about continuing anyway, carrying the weight because putting it down meant giving up entirely. A young warrior named Dakota approached, speaking urgently to Cairo, even before he'd fully woken. Evelyn caught enough words to understand. Scouts had found signs of the soldiers. They were still hunting, moving systematically through the territory, destroying every village they found. Cairo stood, all traces of sleep vanishing. How far? 2 days? Maybe less? They move slowly, but they do not stop. The news spread through the camp like poison. People who'd hoped the worst was over now faced the terrible truth. The soldiers wouldn't quit until they'd eliminated every trace of resistance. An emergency council formed. This time, Evelyn noticed, several women were included, a sign of how desperate their situation had become. Traditional boundaries mattered less when survival itself was at stake. "We cannot keep running," one elder said, his voice raspy with age. "We are slowed by wounded, by children. The soldiers will catch us eventually." "Then we split up," another warrior suggested. "Small groups, harder to track, each taking different directions." "And abandon those too weak to keep up?" Cairo's mother spoke for the first time, her tone sharp. "We do not leave our people behind. That is not who we are." "Then what?" someone else demanded. "We cannot fight them. We tried that and lost." Silence fell, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Evelyn found herself speaking before she'd consciously decided to. "What if we didn't run or fight?" Every eye turned to her. She felt her face flush but forced herself to continue. "What if we disappeared? Found somewhere so remote, so difficult to reach, that even the soldiers wouldn't bother trying? Somewhere we could build a new life, completely hidden." "There is no such place," Dakota said dismissively. "The army maps the whole territory." "Not the Badlands," Cairo said slowly, his expression thoughtful. The rock maze to the north, no water, no game, nothing any sane person would want. They would not waste resources searching there. Because no one can live there, an elder protested. Not live permanently, Cairo agreed, but hide temporarily, long enough for the army to give up, to decide we are dead or gone. Then we emerge somewhere new, somewhere they have already searched. The idea was audacious, desperate, and possibly the only option they had left. The debate raged for hours, but eventually necessity won out. They would go to the Badlands, would endure whatever hardships came with hiding in one of the most inhospitable places on the plains, because the alternative was extinction. Preparations began immediately. They had almost nothing, a few weapons salvaged from the attack, minimal food supplies, the clothes on their backs. But they had knowledge, skills, and most importantly, the will to survive. They set out that evening, moving under cover of darkness. The journey to the Badlands would take 4 days of hard travel, and every moment they remained visible was a moment the soldiers might find them. Evelyn walked beside Cairo, helping support an elderly woman who'd injured her leg in the cave exodus. Around them, the remnants of their village moved like ghosts through the darkness, silent except for the shuffle of feet and the occasional whimper from exhausted children. On the second night, disaster struck. The wounded warrior they'd been carrying, a man named Ahanu, who'd taken 2 bullets defending the entrance, developed a fever. By morning, he was delirious, his wound infected despite their best efforts to clean it. The medicine woman did everything she could, but without proper supplies, without clean water and rest, there was only so much to be done. Evelyn sat with Ahanu's wife as he died, holding her hand while she keened her grief into the uncaring sky. It was the sound of a heart breaking, raw and primal, and it echoed Evelyn's own losses in ways that made her chest ache. They couldn't even bury him properly. Just covered him with the rocks in a shallow grave and kept moving, because staying meant dying. That night, as they made cold camp, no fires, nothing that might give away their location, Evelyn found Cairo sitting apart from the others, staring at nothing. She sat beside him without speaking. "I am losing them," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My people. One by one, I am watching them die, and I cannot stop it. This isn't your fault. I am a warrior, a leader. I should protect them." He looked at his hands. "But I cannot fight an enemy that has endless soldiers, endless supplies, endless determination to erase us from this land." Evelyn took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You're doing everything possible. You're keeping them alive, keeping them moving. That's not nothing." "It does not feel like enough." "It never does," she said quietly. "I felt that way after my father died, like I should have done something, anything, to prevent it. But sometimes terrible things happen, and all we can do is survive them and try to build something better from the ruins." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw the same struggle she fought daily, the weight of carrying forward when every part of you wanted to quit. "How did you survive it?" he asked. "The grief, the loss, the rage at what was taken." "I found something worth surviving for." She squeezed his hand. "I found you." The words hung between them, simple and profound. Then Cairo pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and she felt wetness against her neck that might have been tears. They held each other in the darkness, while around them, their people tried to sleep despite hunger and fear and exhaustion that went bone deep. The Badlands appeared on the 4th day like a wound in the earth. Massive rock formations rose from the plains in twisted spires and maze-like canyons, carved by wind and water into shapes that seemed impossible. The ground was hard-packed dirt and stone, vegetation sparse and hostile. Heat radiated from the rocks during the day, making the air shimmer and dance. It was beautiful in a terrible way and completely inhospitable to human life. "We will die here," someone muttered. "Or we live," Cairo countered. "We find the deep canyons where there is shade. We ration what little water we have. We endure until it is safe to leave." They pushed into the maze, following narrow passages between towering walls of red rock. The temperature dropped as the sun's angle changed, and in the deepest canyons they found blessed shade. More importantly, they found a seep, a tiny spring trickling from the rock face, barely more than dampness, but enough to keep them alive if they were careful. The next weeks were the hardest of Evelyn's life, and that was saying something considering everything she'd already endured. Food ran out within days. They survived on what they could forage: insects, roots, the occasional lizard. Some people couldn't keep even that down, their bodies rejecting sustenance in favor of shutting down entirely. The elderly suffered worst. 2 more died in the first week, their bodies simply giving out. The children grew hollow-eyed and silent, too tired even to cry. Evelyn worked alongside the other women, doing whatever needed doing. She learned to find moisture in the rocks at dawn, to identify which plants were edible and which would cause sickness, to stretch their meager resources in ways that seemed impossible. She also learned what it meant to truly sacrifice for community. When food was scarce, adults gave their portions to children. When water ran low, the strong took less so the weak could survive. People who'd lost everything still found ways to help those who'd lost even more. It was humbling and heartbreaking and strangely beautiful. Cairo grew gaunt, his face hollowing out as he refused food to ensure others ate. Evelyn tried to force him to eat more, but he was stubborn. "I am strong," he would say. "Others need it more." "You're no good to anyone if you starve," she'd argue, but he'd just smile and kiss her forehead and continue giving away his portions. On the 18th day in the Badlands, Evelyn woke feeling strange. Her stomach churned, and when she tried to stand, dizziness made the world spin. Starvation, she thought, finally catching up to her. But when the nausea hit again the next morning, and the next, a different possibility occurred to her. She sought out the medicine woman, speaking quietly so no one else would hear. The old woman examined her with knowing eyes, asked pointed questions, then nodded slowly. "You carry a child," she said simply. The words hit Evelyn like lightning. A child. She was pregnant. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling nothing different yet, knowing everything had changed. A baby. Cairo's baby. Created in the midst of all this chaos and loss and desperate survival. She should have been terrified. They were hiding in the Badlands, slowly starving, being hunted by an army. This was possibly the worst time in human history to be pregnant. Instead, she felt something that might have been hope. Life, continuing despite everything. A future taking root even as the present crumbled around them. That night, she told Cairo. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Shock, followed by fierce joy, followed immediately by protective concern. "We need to get you out of here," he said urgently. "You need proper food, safety." "I need exactly what everyone else needs," she interrupted. "To survive until it's safe to leave. This baby..." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "This baby is going to be born into a better world than this. I'll make sure of it." Cairo's eyes shone in the firelight. "A child," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "Our child." "Two worlds," Evelyn said, echoing the pattern he'd made on her bracelet months ago. "Becoming one." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Evelyn felt the baby between them like a promise, that life could emerge from death, that love could survive hatred, that hope existed even in the darkest moments. The news spread through the camp by morning. In a place where hope was scarce as water, the promise of new life was a gift beyond measure. Women who'd been strangers offered advice, shared the last of their hidden food stores, told Evelyn she was carrying the future and must be protected at all costs. Cairo's mother wept openly, the first tears Evelyn had seen from the stern woman, and embraced her with fierce joy. "My grandchild," she kept saying, "my grandchild will be born free." The certainty in her voice made it sound like prophecy. On the 23rd day in the Badlands, the scouts returned with news. The soldiers had moved on. They'd swept through the territory, found no sign of survivors, and were being recalled to deal with conflicts elsewhere. The hunting was over. They'd won by simply refusing to die. The celebration was muted. They were too weak, had lost too much. But relief was palpable. They could leave this place, could find water and food and begin rebuilding once again. They emerged from this Badlands like ghosts returning to the world of the living. Thin, exhausted, diminished in number but unbroken in spirit. Cairo led them north, away from the territories being settled by whites, deeper into lands that remained wild and free. The journey took weeks, their progress slowed by weakness and the need to forage constantly. But gradually, they grew stronger, found game and clean water. The children began to laugh again. The adults started planning rather than just surviving. They found a valley tucked between mountains, lush with grass and crossed by a clear river. Plenty of game, sheltered from harsh weather, and most importantly, hidden from casual discovery. "Here," Cairo said, surveying the land. "We build here." The work began immediately. Teepees went up, storage pits were dug, hunting parties ranged out to stock supplies for winter. It was hard work, exhausting work, but it was work that built rather than merely maintained. Evelyn threw herself into it, despite Cairo's protests that she should rest. She worked alongside the other women, helping tan hides, prepare food, gather materials. Her pregnancy was beginning to show now, a small swell beneath her dress, and she caught people looking at it with expressions of quiet satisfaction. A future, growing, a reason to keep fighting. One evening, as the village took shape around them, Najoni found Evelyn sitting by the river, watching the sun set over the mountains. "You have changed so much," Najoni observed, settling beside her. "From the terrified girl who arrived to this—" She gestured at Evelyn's calm expression, her capable hands, the way she belonged in this landscape now. "I had to change," Evelyn said. "The person I was couldn't have survived this." "And do you regret it? The change?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. Did she regret losing the girl she'd been, the life she'd planned before the raid? "I regret the price," she said finally. "My father's death, the violence, the suffering, but the person I've become?" She touched her stomach, felt the tiny flutter of movement that was her child. "No, I don't regret her." Najoni smiled. "Good, because she is strong, a survivor, exactly what this baby will need." That night, lying beside Cairo in their newly constructed teepee, Evelyn stared at the smoke hole above and thought about the journey that had brought her here. 19 months ago, she'd been a rancher's daughter with simple dreams and a predictable future. Now she was a warrior's wife, pregnant with a child who would bridge two worlds, fluent in a language she'd never imagined speaking, skilled in arts she'd never known existed. Everything she'd been was gone, but everything she'd become was here, real and solid, and hers by choice. "What are you thinking?" Cairo asked, his hand splayed protectively over her growing belly. "About how far we've come, how much we've survived. We have a long way yet to go," he warned. "The soldiers may return. The winter will be hard. Building a life from nothing is never easy." "I know," she said, "but we're not starting from nothing. We have each other. We have our people. We have this." She covered his hand with hers. "That's more than nothing." He pulled her close, and they lay together listening to the night sounds of the village. Children settling to sleep, adults talking quietly around fires, horses moving in the corral. The sounds of life continuing. The winter did prove hard, as Cairo predicted. Food ran short, illness spread through the camp, and bitter cold tested their endurance once again. But they survived it, together, supporting each other, refusing to give up. And when spring came, thawing the frozen ground and bringing new growth, Evelyn's time came as well. The labor was long and difficult. Evelyn had witnessed births in the village, knew what to expect, but knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. Pain that seemed endless, that made her think she would break apart, that tested every bit of strength she'd built over the past months. Cairo's mother and the medicine woman attended her, along with Najoni and several other women. They spoke encouragement in words that had become as familiar as her native English, their hands gentle and sure as they guided her through the ordeal. Cairo paced outside, forbidden from entering as tradition dictated, his anxiety palpable even through the teepee walls. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the baby emerged, small and perfect and screaming with impressive fury. "A daughter," the medicine woman announced, placing the tiny bundle in Evelyn's arms. "Strong lungs. She will survive." Evelyn looked down at her daughter, and felt something shift fundamentally in her chest. This small person, barely bigger than her forearm, was everything. The future made flesh, hope personified. She had Cairo's dark hair and Evelyn's lighter skin, a perfect blend of both her parents. Two worlds made one, just as the bracelet had promised. "Can I come in?" Cairo called from outside, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. "Yes," Evelyn called back, her own voice thick with tears. "Come meet your daughter." He entered slowly, almost reverently, and when he saw the baby in Evelyn's arms, his face transformed. Pure, unguarded joy mixed with wonder, mixed with fierce protectiveness. He knelt beside them, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. She gripped it immediately, her small fist surprisingly strong, and Cairo made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "She is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect." "We did good work," Evelyn agreed, exhausted but elated. "What will we name her?" They'd discussed this during the pregnancy, had gone back and forth between names from both their cultures. Now, looking at their daughter's face, Evelyn knew. "Asha," she said. It was a name from Cairo's language, meaning hope. Hope for the future. Hope that brought us through darkness. "Asha," Cairo repeated, testing the word. "Yes, perfect." He leaned in to kiss Evelyn, gentle and grateful, then kissed his daughter's forehead with infinite care. In that moment, in that small teepee in a hidden valley, a new family was complete. Born from violence and loss, forged through survival and choice, held together by love that had seemed impossible but proved stronger than hatred. The village celebrated Asha's birth with a feast, modest by the standards of their old life, but generous given their limited resources. People brought gifts, small things carefully made or saved, a soft rabbit hide for wrapping the baby, a carved wooden toy, beaded decorations for her cradle. Cairo's mother was transformed by grandmotherhood. The stern woman who'd been cold to Evelyn at first now spent hours holding Asha, singing old songs, telling stories in the flowing language that was now Evelyn's second tongue. "She carries both our bloods," the old woman said one evening, gazing at the sleeping baby. "She will be bridge between worlds, will understand both, belong to both." "Or to neither," Evelyn said quietly, voicing a fear she'd held since discovering her pregnancy. "No," Cairo's mother said firmly. "She belongs to herself, creates her own path. That is gift you give her, choice you did not have." The words resonated. Evelyn had been taken, forced to adapt, compelled to change, but Asha would be born into both worlds, would choose for herself how to navigate them. That freedom, the ability to choose, was perhaps the greatest gift any parent could give. As Asha grew, the village thrived. The hidden valley proved an ideal location, providing everything they needed while remaining difficult for outsiders to find. Traders eventually discovered them. Word spread among those who dealt with all peoples, and they were able to acquire supplies, news from the outside world, occasional luxuries. The news was rarely good. More villages destroyed, more people pushed onto reservations, more land claimed by the expanding frontier. The world Evelyn had been born into was consuming the world she'd chosen, slowly but inexorably. But in their valley, they remained free. Hidden, yes. Constantly vigilant, certainly. But free to live according to their own customs, raise their children in their own ways, exist on their own terms. Asha took her first steps when the leaves turned gold that autumn. She spoke her first words in both languages simultaneously, refusing to choose one over the other. She grew strong and quick and fiercely independent, traits inherited from both parents. Watching her daughter play with other children, Evelyn sometimes thought about her father. Wished he could have met his granddaughter, seen the life she'd built from the ashes of the one he'd known. She'd made peace with his death, mostly. The grief had dulled from a constant scream to a persistent ache, manageable if never truly gone. She honored his memory by living well, by surviving, by creating something beautiful from terrible circumstances. "Do you ever think about going back?" Cairo asked one night as they watched Asha sleep between them. "To your people? Your old life?" Evelyn considered the question. There had been a time when she'd have said yes without hesitation. Now? "This is my life," she said simply. "You, Asha, this village, this is home. Everything else is just memory." "But if you could have both, your father alive, your old home intact, and still have this?" "Life doesn't work that way," she said. "We don't get to keep everything. We make choices, accept consequences, build what we can from what remains." She looked at him. "I chose you, chose this, and I'd make the same choice again." It wasn't entirely true. Part of her would always wonder what might have been, would always mourn what was lost. But it was true enough for the life they were living. Cairo pulled her close, careful not to disturb their sleeping daughter. "I do not deserve you," he murmured. "Probably not," she agreed, but without rancor. "But you have me anyway." 2 years after Asha's birth, Evelyn became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, was less terrified and more excited. The baby, a son they named Dakota after the warrior who'd scouted for them during their escape, was born healthy and loud, adding his voice to the growing chorus of children in the village. Life settled into rhythms. Seasons changed, children grew, the village adapted and evolved. There were good years and hard years, abundance and scarcity, but they endured. Other survivors occasionally found their way to the hidden valley, remnants of destroyed villages, refugees from reservations who chose freedom over safety, even a few white captives like Evelyn had been, choosing to stay rather than return. Each brought their own skills, their own stories, their own pieces of a world being torn apart and reassembled into new configurations. The village became something unique, a blend of traditions from multiple tribes, practices adapted from necessity, customs created through collective experience. Not purely traditional, not assimilated, but something new forged from survival. Evelyn found her place in this hybrid community as a bridge between worlds. Her ability to speak both English and the tribal language fluently made her valuable when traders came. Her understanding of both cultures helped negotiate conflicts, explain customs, teach children. She became, in her own way, a leader, not through formal position, but through quiet influence and earned respect. "You have become exactly who you needed to be," Najoni told her one day, as they worked together preparing hides. "The girl who arrived would not have survived. But the woman you've become, she thrives." Evelyn smiled, watching her children play nearby, Asha teaching her younger brother some game involving stones and sticks. "I had good teachers." "You had the will to learn," Najoni corrected. "Not everyone does." It was true. Some of the captives who'd come after her never adapted, remained bitter and broken until sickness or despair claimed them. Evelyn had made a different choice. Not an easy choice, not a simple one, but hers. When Asha was 7 and Dakota 5, word came through the trader network that changed everything. The army was pulling back from the frontier, needed elsewhere for conflicts that had nothing to do with tribal lands. The pressure that had driven them into hiding was finally, tentatively, easing. The village council debated for weeks. Should they emerge from hiding, try to establish more permanent settlements, or remain as they were, invisible and safe? Cairo argued for caution. The army may return. If we reveal ourselves, we become targets again. But the elders were tired of hiding. "We grow old in secret. Our children deserve better than constant fear." Eventually, a compromise emerged. They would stay in the hidden valley as a home base, but establish satellite camps in less remote areas. Test the waters, so to speak, see if peace was truly possible. It was Evelyn who suggested the location for the first satellite camp. Land near where her old ranch had been, territory she knew well. It felt circular, returning to where it all began, but the symmetry appealed to her. They sent a small group to establish the camp, Cairo leading the warriors while Evelyn stayed behind with the children. It was the first time they'd been separated since Asha's birth, and both found it harder than expected. But the camp succeeded. No soldiers came. Traders welcomed the business. Life, tentatively, resumed something approximating normalcy. Over the next few years, more camps were established. A network of communities, connected but dispersed, harder to destroy than a single village. Evelyn and Cairo eventually moved to the original satellite camp with their children. It was strange being back in familiar territory, seeing landmarks she remembered from childhood. The ranch itself was long gone, reclaimed by prairie grass, but she could still identify where things had been. She took her children there one day, showed them the place she'd been born. "This is where your grandfather lived," she told them, speaking in the mixed language they all used now. "He was a good man, brave, strong. He would have loved you both." Asha, now nearly 10 and frighteningly perceptive, asked the question Evelyn had been avoiding. "Did grandfather die when you were taken?" There was no point in lying. "Yes." "Do you hate us?" Asha asked quietly. "Because our people killed him?" Evelyn knelt down, taking both her children's hands. "Your people didn't kill him. Desperate people trying to survive in a war they didn't start killed him. And yes, for a long time I hated them. Hated your father. Hated everything about the life I was forced into. But not anymore, Dakota asked, his young face serious. Now I understand that hate and love can exist together. I can grieve my father and love your father, can mourn my old life and cherish my new one, can carry all of it without breaking. She pulled them close. You are not responsible for the past. Neither am I. We're only responsible for what we build going forward. That night, Caro found her sitting outside their lodge, staring at the stars. You took them to the ranch, he said. Not a question. Yes. And I made peace with it, I think. Finally. She looked at him. I spent so long fighting what happened, resisting the changes it forced on me. But those changes made me who I am, made us possible, made our children possible. She touched his face. I wouldn't trade that for anything. He pulled her into his arms, and they stood together under the vast prairie sky, two people who'd survived the impossible and built something beautiful from the ruins. The years continued their steady march. Children grew into adolescents, then into adults. Evelyn's hair began showing silver at the temples. Cairo's mother passed peacefully in her sleep, satisfied that her line would continue. The frontier kept changing around them. Towns grew larger, railroads cut across the plains. More settlers arrived daily. The world they'd known was being transformed, sometimes violently, always irreversibly. But in their network of camps, life continued. Not unchanged, change was constant, necessary, survival itself, but on their own terms. Asha grew into a remarkable young woman, fluent in 3 languages, comfortable in multiple worlds, carving out her own identity that honored both heritages without being limited by either. She eventually married a young man from another mixed community, and their wedding blended ceremonies from 4 different traditions into something uniquely theirs. Dakota became a skilled hunter and diplomat, traveling between camps, maintaining connections, negotiating with traders, and occasionally with government officials. He understood, as his parents did, that survival meant adaptation without surrender. One evening, when Evelyn was in her late 40s and her children had children of their own, she and Cairo walked to a rise overlooking their camp. The setting sun painted everything in gold, and the sounds of family and community drifted up to them, laughter, conversation, the ordinary noise of life continuing. Did you ever imagine this? Cairo asked. When you first arrived, terrified and grieving that you would still be here decades later? Never, Evelyn admitted. I thought I'd escape or die trying. Thought I'd never accept this life. She smiled. I was wrong about a lot of things. As was I. I thought you would be just another captive. Thought you would break or flee. He took her hand, worn and calloused now from decades of work. I did not expect to love you. And yet here we are. Here we are, he agreed. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Behind them, their legacy played out in children and grandchildren, in traditions preserved and new ones created, in a community that survived because it refused to be destroyed. Evelyn thought about the girl she'd been at 19, the one who'd watched her world burn. That girl would have been horrified to see what she'd become, married to her captor, raising children in the culture that had destroyed her family, speaking a foreign language more fluently than her native one. But that girl hadn't understood what the woman she'd become knew with absolute certainty. That survival meant transformation, that love could emerge from hatred, that home was something you built rather than something you were born into. She'd lost everything in that raid so many years ago. Her father, her home, her planned future, her very identity. But from those ashes, she'd built something stronger. A life chosen rather than assigned. A family created through love instead of obligation. A self that integrated rather than rejected her fractured history. No regrets? Cairo asked, as if reading her thoughts. Evelyn considered the question one final time. Did she regret the path that brought her here? The violence, the loss, the forced transformation? I regret the price, she said, the same answer she'd given Najoni years ago. But not the outcome. Cairo nodded, satisfied with that truth. They turned and walked back toward camp together, toward the life they'd built, toward the family waiting for them, toward whatever future remained. Behind them, the sun finished setting, painting the prairie in shades of crimson and gold. Ahead of them, fires burned warm and welcoming, lighting the way home. And Evelyn Carter, captive, survivor, wife, mother, bridge between worlds, walked forward into the darkness without fear. She'd survived worse than nightfall. She'd survived the impossible and emerged stronger. And whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it the same way she'd faced everything else since that terrible night when her old life ended and her new one began. With courage, with adaptability, with love, and with the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.